Let's take a look at my function menu on the A7R Mark IV. Hi folks, I'm Juan Pons, and on this video I want to share with you what my function menu settings are for my A7R Mark IV. I talked about this on a previous video, so here I wanted to go in detail as to what my settings are for the function menu set. Now, what is a function menu set? The function menu is a quick menu that you can invoke very easily by pressing the function button on the back of the camera. And it allows you to place here 10 of your most frequently menu or camera configurations or camera settings, so that you can go easily in here and change these settings without having to go through the rigmarole of going through the menus and all the different pages in the menus, or even going into my menu. This is where I put my top used functions. And you have two rows, as you can see here on the screen. 5 items, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items. So you actually have 12, not 10. My apologies for that. You have 12 items that you can put up here, your 12 most accessible configuration settings. Now, I talked about how to invoke it when you're shooting in the camera, allows you and changing these menus. And I'm going to go through each of these in detail in a few minutes. Before, I wanted to show you how do you go about setting these up. So basically you're going to go into the menu and you're going to select camera 2, and under camera 2 you're going to go to page 9 out of 11, and in here you're going to select function menu set, and you have, as you can see here, 2 different rows or 2 different settings that you can have. The top one is from when you're shooting stills, and you can tell by the little picture icon that you have up there next to function menu. And then you have on the bottom row another set of function menu items with what looks like a little icon of film, which is basically this setup is for when we're shooting videos. I don't shoot videos with this camera really at all, so I haven't really gone through and customized these all that much. So I'm not going to really get into that. I'm really going to talk about for when we're shooting stills with the camera. And what I'm going to do is, after I'm done showing you all these items in detail, I'm going to go back in here and show you where each of these items are, so that you can select these just as you want, as I have them if you want, to make it a little bit easier for you. Okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at these items. Our first item here on the top left is going to be my drive mode. Yes, this is a little bit redundant because the default setting on the Sony cameras is for you to tap on the left side of the control wheel on the back to invoke drive mode. And certainly that's a lot easier than going into the menu items. But sometimes I like to block some of my controls, so that's why I have this one here as a redundant item. Now here I can go in and select all the different types of shootings, whether I want single shooting, continuous shooting, and then in here I can go left to right to select low, medium, high, or high plus. I can do the self timers with 10 seconds, 5 seconds, or 2 seconds. I can do continuous self timer. Basically it'll take 3 pictures in this case at 10 seconds apart each. And then I can do drive C. I can do bracket C. Bracket C means continuous bracket. And this is going to do 2 or 5 exposures, for example, in this current setting, at 2 stops each, separating by 2 stops each. And you'll see down below you have bracket S, and that's single shot. Now, the cool thing about bracket continuous is that if you set a different menu item on the back of the camera, and I can show you that if you guys are interested in, you can then set the camera so that when you press the shutter once, it actually goes ahead and after a timer of 5, 10, whatever seconds, will go through and take all of those shots, all 5 shots. without you having to do anything else. And this is when I'm shooting brackets, which is not all that often. This is how I shoot brackets, is I do the BRK bracket continuous mode, and then I can set here by moving the controls on the back of my camera, the wheel left or right. I can choose the settings, whether it's 3 exposures at 3 stops apart or 5 exposures 3 stops apart, and so forth. Now, typically what I will do is 5 exposures 2 stops apart if I'm going to do you know, a bracket, but it's really up to you and depending on the scene that you're shooting. Now, when you go to bracket S, what this allows you to do is, you know, you take a shot every time you press the shutter. So you have to press the shutter for each frame that you're taking. You have here brackets for, you know, white balance. So you can actually do a series of images with different white balance modes, and the same thing for DRO or dynamic range optimization. I never really use those. The one that I use is the bracket continuous at 2 exposures or 5 exposures at 2 stops apart. Now, let me show you real quick. I know I'm digressing here a tiny bit, but I want to show you on the menu where you go in and set the timer that will be used in the bracket continuous setting. Okay, in order to change the, or set and change or adjust the bracket settings on the camera, you're going to go into camera menu 1 at the top, and you're going to go into page number 3. And here you have bracket settings. And if we go into bracket settings, you can see that the first item that we have is self timer during bracket. You can actually set up where there is no timer at all when you do the bracket, meaning that you press that shutter and it's going to go and take all shots immediately. But you can also set different timers. You can do a 2-second timer, a 5-second timer, or a 10-second timer. And this is especially useful when you're doing the continuous bracket setting, so that when you click on that, if you have it set to 2, you set your drive, as we did earlier, to bracket continuous. When I press that shutter now, what's going to happen is the camera's going to count down a timer of 2 seconds, and then it's going to take all 5 shots in one go. Okay? Now, let's go back to our function menu here. As you see, we changed that earlier, the dry mode. The next one is going to be our focus mode. Is what kind of focus system do you want to use? Do you want to use a single shot? You want to use the automatic or the continuous? Now, I don't have an option here for continuous, but and the reason for that is because right now I'm in bracket mode. So if I want to change this out of continuous and I go, sorry, out of bracket mode and I go into continuous, or even if I go into if I go into single shot, let's go into single shot so I can show you. Now, and I go back here into focus mode, now I have access to all the different settings, whether it's single shot autofocus, automatic autofocus, continuous autofocus, DMF, or manual focus. Now, I use either manual focus when I'm shooting, for example, macro oftentimes, continuous, or single shot. I don't do automatic. Automatic is kind of a hybrid between a single shot and continuous, and I don't do DMF either. So the ones that I really use are, most of the time, I will tell you right now, 95% of the time, I'm in continuous mode. Okay. Now, the next one that we have here is the focus area. And this allows you to select the different focus area modes that your camera has. Whether it's the wide that encompasses the entire screen or the entire viewfinder, zone, which is, you know, basically broken up into 3 different sections, center, flexible spot, and so forth. Now, the 3 modes that I use the most are center, zone, and flexible spot. Personally, I use center 90+% of the time. And that's just because that's the way I've done it for the longest time, and that's what I'm used to, so that's what I like to continue doing. But you have other options here, like flexible spot, and you can actually change the size of the actual focus area. I wish that there was a little preview here. There's all this blank space in here. Why couldn't they show you a preview of what the size of that spot is going to be? But after a while, you kind of learn what it is. So I typically use the medium. I sometimes will use small, sometimes large, but most of the time I'll use medium. So I really go between these three different sections. Okay, the next one, auto ISO minimum shutter speed. And this is absolutely awesome. I love this feature. Now, I hope you guys have heard of the 1/over rule. The 1/over rule basically states that in order to get a sharp shot when you're hand holding a camera, is that your shutter speed should be at least 1/over your focal length. What does that mean? And I didn't mean to get technical here. What that means really is that if you're shooting at, for example, 100 millimeters, if you're using a 100 millimeter lens, like this 24-105 and I'm 105, my shutter speed should be at least 1/100th of a second in order to achieve a sharp image. Now, that doesn't really take into account image stabilization, but I don't really like to have that as part of the equation. The image stabilization, gives me a little extra buffer or breathing room, if you will, but I don't like to take it into consideration. I'm always looking to shoot at 1/over my focal length using the 1/over rule. Now, I also shoot in aperture priority 95+% of the time. And lately, past couple years, I've been shooting in auto ISO as well. And I adjust my exposure basically based on my on exposure compensation, which I love that of the Sony cameras. They have a dedicated exposure compensation dial on the top. Now, what does this do? When I have ISO A or ISO aperture priority minimum shutter speed to set to standard, what that means is that the camera will automatically adjust my shutter speed to the 1/over rule. So no matter what aperture I'm shooting at, which when I'm shooting aperture priority, I get to set the aperture myself, right? So I'll set my aperture and the camera will adjust the ISO in order to satisfy the 1/over rule. So that if I'm shooting at 400 millimeters, that my shutter speed is at minimum 1/400th of a second. Now I can also adjust that. I can set it to fast, which is basically twice as fast. So if you're shooting at 100 millimeter lens, then the camera is going to set your minimum shutter speed to 1/200th of a second, and so forth. Or you can go slower, or there's even a faster or a slower even setting here. My rule of thumb is I leave it on standard. Sometimes I may go to fast if I have a faster moving subject and I don't want to move over to shutter speed, to shutter priority. So absolutely awesome, awesome feature on these cameras. You gotta make sure though that you're shooting in aperture priority and you have auto ISO turned on for this to work. You can also have other settings here, but basically this is saying that the shutter speed is going to be at a minimum 8,000ths of a second and so forth. But I just like to use the standard and let the camera calculate the shutter speed based on my focal length. I hope that was clear for you guys. If not, make sure to let me know in the comments and I'll try to explain it in a better way or a different way at the very least. The next item that I have set up here is DRO. And typically I have DRO set to off. What is DRO? DRO is dynamic range optimization. And what this allows the camera to do is produce a preview, the image that you see in the back of your camera through the viewfinder, by making some automatic adjustments. The camera will make adjustments to that raw file and create a preview file that looks stunning, that looks like you've already edited in your digital darkroom. Now your raw file, if you're shooting RAW, is still going to be raw, no changes been done there. But if you're shooting JPEG, DRO actually gets applied to that JPEG image, so you can actually see what the camera would have done. And what the camera is trying to do is like taking, for example, in Lightroom, moving the shadow sliders to the right and the highlight sliders to the left. So it's trying to expand the dynamic range by bringing light into the shadows and toning down those highlights to get a much more pleasant exposure, and you have different settings here. You can have off, or you have different levels. You have auto, or level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. But I typically have mine on off. Okay, the next one is metering mode. And the meter mode allows me to very quickly change the meter mode in my camera. Now, I 99.999% of the time leave my metering mode on multi. Multi is where the camera is using, all the algorithms the camera manufacturers develop to come up with the best exposure given the subject matter that you're shooting. It's not perfect. This is why we do exposure compensation, but it's as close as a machine's going to get nowadays to coming up with the right exposure. So that's why I use multi. But this allows you to very quickly change the metering mode by changing the setting. Let's go to the next one, is white balance. Is the next one that I have set up. And typically 99.999% of the time, I'm shooting in auto white balance because I'm shooting raw. And I can adjust my white balance in the digital darkroom as much as I want without any problem. So why adjust it while I'm out in the field? There are a few, times here and there, maybe twice a year maybe, that I actually change it from auto white balance. So that's why I have it here. Pixel shift, as you may have heard with the Sony A7R Mark IV and 3, there's this pixel shift technology that allows you to shoot multiple pictures of a subject and the camera, and use then software to merge those together to create a really, really, really high resolution image. I don't use it all that often. I play with it from time to time because there's lots of limitations. Your camera needs to be on a tripod. The subject matter has to be still. Any movement's gonna mess up the image. So it's really for like product photography or still photography, that kind of stuff, still life photography. So I don't really use it all that often because I'm a primarily wildlife and nature photographer. My subjects are moving, even plants with the wind. So, but I have it here because I like to play with it from time to time, so I can enable it very quickly. Interval shooting. This allows me to set the interval shooting in the camera. Allows me to set the camera up to do a shot every second, 2 shots a second, or a shot every minute or whatnot. And I'm going to do a separate video on using interval shooting in the camera, but I have it here so that I can very quickly set up interval shooting to do a time lapse, for example. File format allows me to change my file format from RAW to RAW plus JPEG or JPEG. Now, 99.999% of the time, I am shooting RAW, but I still have it in here in case I do want to shoot a RAW plus JPEG, which happens once in a while. So that's why I have it here. This is super important. Prioritize recording media. These cameras have 2 memory cards on them, right? So this allows you to tell the camera which card it should record to first. And I say first because you can set the camera up to record to one card and then relay record onto another card, meaning if one card fills up, you can have it then overflow, if you will, to a second card. Also, you can set the camera up to shoot RAW on one card and JPEG on the other, and so forth. And this prioritize sets what the priority is on those types of recording. So I have it here because sometimes, if I know I'm getting close to getting full on one card, I may manually go in and switch it to the other card very quickly. So that's why I have it here. And then the last one is steady shot, whether you want steady shot on or off. And there's certain cases where I may turn it off. Again, 99.9% of the time, I'm shooting with steady shot on, which is image stabilization, by the way, or VR reduction, or VR vibration reduction for those Nikon folks. But in this case, with this lens, it's kind of, you can see it's grayed out. It's not really available, but that's because my lens has that on the side, has a switch on it right here, which allows me to switch the image stabilization on or off. And this is the only way I can do it. I cannot do it via the menus. Okay, so this is my setup for my cameras. As a matter of fact, my A9 is pretty much identical to this. I think the one thing that changes is, for example, pixel shift. I may have something else in there, maybe interval shooting, and that's about it. All the other ones I believe should be the same. Okay, so now let's go back over here to page camera 2, page 9, where the settings are for the function menu set. And I'm going to show you, in case you want to set these up the same way I will have them, where to find these. And the reason I say that is because as I go in here and I click on one of these items, you'll see that I have 15 pages worth of options. So sometimes it's really hard to find these. So for my first one, the dry mode is on page 2 of 15. Focus is on page 3 of 15. Focus area is on page 3 of 15 also. Sorry, the first one was focus mode, and then there's focus area. ISO auto minimum shutter speed. This is on page 5 of 15. Dynamic range optimization is on page 7 of 15. Mirroring mode is on page 5. White balance is on page 7. Pixel shift is on page 2. Interval shooting or time-lapse shooting is on page 2. File format, where you select RAW versus JPEG, is on page 1. Prioritize record media is on page 14 of 15. And steady shot is on page 11 of 15. Well, folks, I hope that you found this video helpful in setting up your function menu that allows you to get to some of these items very quickly, even without taking your eyes off the viewfinder. Very, very important. If you found this video helpful and this information useful, I ask that you please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell on the top. And if you really found it useful, that you share this with your friends, so maybe they'll want to join in as well. Well, until next time, take care, folks.